they make this big great enemy that's out to get them and the whole world, and it's like it's interesting. It's like they they supply like an entire enchanted world, but it's something interesting now that we've been talking, how you said it's like these franchise movies, they supply you with something, so they like limit your imagination, and it's very much like conspiracy theories kind of do the same thing, where it doesn't really it it kind of gives you the illusion that you're in this kind of like big enchanted story, but it actually puts up certain walls in a way that you can't break out of. Like it's funny, like the conspiracy theorists will question everything until you start questioning the conspiracy.
We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromous. This is Byrne Power coming to you from another beautiful autumn day here in Tbilisi, Georgia. And today we've got another in our series of Anadromous Dialogues. Anadromous, as some of you may remember, means describes the action of a fish swimming against the stream to go home to spawn. And what we're trying to do here is to encourage you to swim against the stream of various kinds of propaganda, to question things. And so today in our dialogue, we have a man who reached out to me a few weeks back. We had a private conversation. His name is David Overby, lives in Missouri. And we decided to, okay, let's have the next one be a public conversation. And so that's what this is. And it was quite an interesting conversation, I must say. And I'm not going to say too much more. We'll let the conversation unfold. But I suggest listening to the whole thing. It is worth doing so. Before we get to the conversation, though, let me just remind you, you can help the channel by liking this, subscribing, sharing the video, commenting. All these things help the algorithms and maybe help people get some of these ideas if you like them yourself. And I noticed that I'm getting less traction than I used to, and I suspect it's because of the flood of shorts. The YouTube has decided to encourage everyone to make these under 1 minute videos, imitating TikTok. As far as even having this kind of mindless algorithm after it, which either puts it on repeat or sends you to the next video. So you just like, it's kind of like, I don't know, video for people who have a sweet tooth and more people who have ADHD, ADD, that sort of thing, where they can't concentrate. But I also think these videos cause you to lose your concentration. And I just found that there is such a thing as a shorts blocker. And so I have put it on my channel. And I'm not trying to sell it here. I just look for a shorts blocker for whatever your system is. And it allows you to either turn them into just a regular 1 minute or under video, or block them from showing up and clogging up your feeds. This has happened within the last 6 months, and frankly, I'm tired of it. And my feeling is, don't give in. Don't start doing this, because this has nothing to do with the length of the video. It has everything to do with algorithmic overdrive of clogging up your mental systems much further. Anyway, with that said, you can, if you wish, support the channel. There is a link below with instructions of how to do it. So Check that out. Meanwhile, let's talk with David Overby in Missouri.
Greetings.
Hello, good morning. Early morning.
Yeah, it is early morning here. I had to wake up at 5:30 in the morning just so I'd be awake for this.
I totally get that.
Just like stumble over. So I am on record now, and but if we say, if we start off and we say a few things that aren't pertinent to anything, I would cut that off, and I edit these a bit, so you can tell me if you think this is worth putting on. If not, it doesn't matter to me. So how you doing?
Good. I been pretty busy. Had like a wedding over the weekend, and then all 5 of the groomsmen got sick or whatever. They all said it was COVID. I don't know. I just got a fever or whatever. So I've been getting over that, but I'm feeling better.
Well, you know what it is that we have been in this weird zone for the last few years, which also means we've prevented a lot of the normal stuff from getting through.
Yeah.
And so now it's all still there. And it's just kind of like waiting with forks and knives saying, okay, where are you?
Yeah.
And so I think people now are saying almost any cold or anything is COVID. And my feeling is, now I did have something that was definitely COVID before I went to Germany in August. And the reason I knew it was COVID, I lost my sense of taste.
Yep.
Well, actually smell. I had my sense of taste, but not smell, which was really odd because I could taste the difference between sweet and salty, but I couldn't put any flavors to it. And I could do this. I could take wasabi, a little ball of wasabi about this big, put it in my mouth, nothing. Absolutely
weird.
Nothing. Yeah. I could sniff a bottle of rubbing alcohol, nothing. Which normally you're like, oh, and but then I realized, this could be really dangerous if you were smelling stuff. There's stuff you can smell that will really harm you, and or certain kinds of huffing and whatnot. So it's kind of like, but I got it back. I read up on there are certain things you can do to get your sense of smell recovered. And one is to kind of find something that has a strong odor like mustard and put your nose in it. And I could smell like it was like smelling something really far away. And then I was, I could smell a little bit. And then they said, try another thing that has a different kind of strong scent and kind of go back and forth between them. And my sense of smell came back in a couple of days. So
that's so interesting.
Yeah, it is. But you don't really realize what the sense of smell does until you lose it. It's like suddenly life is, you've just gone into a black and white movie. It's
Yeah, people forget they like smell the air outside of their house.
Oh yeah, we use smell all the time. Smell tells you when your body is having problems. Smell tells you when but there's flowers and all these things, and they all have different scents. Smell reminds you of things, and without it, it's like, hey. But I know someone who had some weird flu cold thing. Actually, no, what it was a bug that she picked up at some kind of a yoga retreat, and then she lost her smell permanently. And so, she would always volunteer to go clean up the dog crap, stuff like that. Because once you no longer can smell it, all this stuff changes. I noticed that myself. It's kind of like, oh, bathroom's kind of a nice place when you can't smell anything. So,
well, if you get stuck on poop scooping duty all the time, it's kind of a curse.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't have the same meaning when you can't smell it. It's the smell that adds the extra, to it. It's like walking into that, that public restroom, and before you see anything, it's just the smell that gets to you, you know?
Yeah.
And for good reason.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, I've always thought it was interesting how like the sense of smell out of all the senses are like, it's like the most primal one in a way. Like it's very animal, and it connects us with kind of the very animal side, which is very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So so you had a few thoughts on your mind that you were
I did.
interested in sharing, or
and then of course I watched your conversation with the Laura person.
Laura.
On Christian music,
Laura
which
person.
was
yes, Laura.
Yeah, that was so fascinating because, man, you know, I came from like a mega church background with the fog machines and
excuse me, I didn't realize it had gone that far. The fog machine.
Oh yeah.
I've never been to a church that had fog machines, and I think if I had, I would immediately have some sort of, you know, like puking in my mouth kind of sensation.
Hey, they do the incense. They do the incense at other churches, I guess.
Well, there's a difference.
That's just their form.
Yeah, incense is one thing, but a fog machine is something else. You know, and when incense is used, for instance, in Orthodox churches, you can tell this has a very, very powerful symbolic resonance, and they'll have the censer and they'll be going back and forth and making the shape of the cross with it, and it doesn't at all feel cheesy. Where a fog machine, by its very nature, is going to feel like Limburger cheese. You know, it's just going to have a strong, speaking of a sense of smell, it's just going to smell like something that doesn't belong in a church, you know, unless you're filming a horror film. So, but anyway, you were saying.
Well, you know, it reminded me of like all these childhood memories. I remember especially at like church camps where, you know, everybody's just on fire for Jesus. And I remember one time, like this youth pastor said to me, you know, oh, you never really get into worship like the other kids. You know, it would be like me and a couple stragglers in the back just kind of watching all this. They're like doing the crowd surfing and stuff like that. And it's just like, they told me, they said, well, it's your pride that's blocking you from getting into the worship like the others.
No.
And I was like, I didn't know how to come back to that, but you put it really well in that video, how you said it was all sentimental, because there was something, even as a middle schooler, I recognized as like kind of psychotic, where you like go to worship and you're like having these like emotional cry sessions like every week. That's weird. You know, it makes total sense to have that, you know, there's built up and, you know, stuff has been going on, but it's like every week, like this super weird, like emotional trip of like, I think you said in the lyrics, I hear you say that you believe, but it's exactly that. It's like I always felt that they're like trying to force themselves to believe. And I definitely noticed with kids my age that were really into that stuff, a lot of them like totally dropped off, you know, where some of the other kids that, because they like relied on they called it like a spiritual high, you know, and it's like, well, if that's what you really think it is.
That is precisely what it is, though. And when I was younger and the Jesus people, now we went through different phases in our musical development. And the original phase was very interesting because we would just get together and in houses and such and sing songs together. Also, we wrote songs. We sang songs that we had written, which were very much songs from who we were. Plus, we had adopted songs, some old hymns, but also some newer stuff. And for several years, that's the way it was. Then what started happening is we started doing more services rather than actual, you know, like these Bible studies. And When people say Bible study now, I realize they're talking about a vastly different experience to what we had and we called Bible studies. And then that's the interesting thing about many things. It's the same. When someone says church, you know, when an Orthodox person says church, or a Catholic person says church, or a Reformed Protestant says church, or Pentecostal says church, we're talking about radically different experiences. And it's the same with Bible study. So, but anyway, eventually we started doing services, because originally we said on Sundays, you can go where you want. And then we became a church. And at that point, we started developing some strange habits. And one of them was that we had people who would kind of lead the music. Now, this later became the praise team, the musician, the band up in front, the people who need the smoke machine eventually, evidently, the fog machine. So, but I'm going back to a more primitive period here, where it's just someone with a guitar or a couple people with a guitar just singing, and they may not even stand up. They might just be the people in charge of the music while we're all sitting around together. Yeah. And what I realized at a certain point was, because I did this myself. I was a musician and I would write songs, but I also would lead people in the music. And after a while, we were a charismatic group. I wouldn't call us full-fledged Pentecostal. We weren't like bouncing off the walls, but we were more like what you would find in the megachurch experience is kind of a large, more commercial variant on what we were doing. And when we, when I would lead songs, after a few years, I noticed I could lead people to do things, so that I could lead them, you know, to feel really good and sing really and really have a good time, or lead them into being quiet and everything. And then I started to become very suspicious of what I was doing, because I said, if I'm leading this, and if I can get people to do this, what does this say about the meaning of music? I don't think I could articulate it quite that well, but I began to feel it was too easy to lead people through various emotions towards God. And I think that what you're experiencing is this same process on a large scale. And what's happened is the people who are introducing the children to this, basically what's happened is this becomes rather than an expression of faith towards God, which is what I think the older traditional hymns were. They weren't about leading you on this experience. They were just like, we're singing the song now. And you would sing it the way you would sing it, whatever that was. No one was telling you how to sing it. No one was force feeding you the emotions with which to sing it. So you could sing "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God" and really mean it, or you could just sing it, you know, but it was just how it is. And sometimes it would sound better and such. But I think that now what you're describing to me is essentially a propaganda technique. And this is what I look back now and I say, oh, we were becoming too skilled in how to guide people's emotions. And that is not a good thing to be, you know. And now what it is it's become, I wouldn't want to say an art, but I would say a propaganda technique. And what was happening was, it sounds like you, even as a younger boy, we're beginning to go like, what is all this about? Does that sound like it matches up?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, me and my friends caught on pretty quick, I guess. And we just, I don't know, we couldn't figure it out. We all kind of went our own directions in a lot of ways. You know, some of my friends completely dropped Christianity altogether, thought it was fraud. You know,
well, I went
more down. Yeah.
Jacques Ellul says, whenever you have a propaganda version of Christianity, he says in his book Propaganda, there's a section where he talks about propaganda in the church, and he says, whenever you have the propaganda version of Christianity, it tends to be a hoax. And that's what eventually some of those others who fell away, that's what they started to see. But unfortunately, they didn't have the real thing
Yeah.
to put against that.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like if it is propaganda, I knew one pastor who talked about it, like kind of the kind of mainstream evangelical take is like the boyfriend Jesus, and like Jesus is very much a boyfriend, and it's kind of overdone now, like, oh, it's all just a love song but with God. But it's like, if that is propaganda, I guess I'm like, what is the propaganda for? Wwhy? What
Well,
would they say,
propaganda can be for the truth.
yeah.
Jacques Ellul, in his book on propaganda, which I highly recommend, basically says, and this is the book, I read it in 1982, and I immediately wished I'd read it 10 years earlier when I was younger, because it would have answered a lot of questions. But basically, he says, whenever you get a kind of mass media, large scale technology involved with your communication, you're already indulging in propaganda, which makes me worry a lot about what I'm doing on this channel. Fortunately, only having a couple of thousand followers and such, it seems to be, I'm keeping it on a personal level, and it's just my ideas, which don't seem to exactly one-on-one match up to, even Paul Vanderklay's or Jonathan Peugeot's, certainly not Jordan Peterson's. But the point is, I can tell when there's a propaganda effect when everyone starts using the same language. When they no longer have words that which is fine. I mean, I saw this at L'Abri, and which is such an important place. But there was a way that people just started kind of mirroring the language without necessarily understanding the language. And that's when you get that sort of effect. But L'Abri was pretty ineffective at making propaganda. Even when they made the films by Francis Schaeffer, they were so funky that, you look back today and some of them, you just say, no. Although I still like How Should We Then Live, because it's so funky. And I think the funkiness works for it, because it almost shows you the bones of what they're doing, so that you go like, oh, okay. And now they went into this room to record him to talk. Whereas the more slick the presentation, the more you're starting to walk into the realm of propaganda. The more you're entering into, and this is why, and it's not that I'm against a certain level of professionalism. It's rather there's certain techniques that get employed. Like right now, I've had people say to me, so Byrne, are you going to start making shorts? And I'm going like, well, who brainwashed you? Why would I want to do that? 5 minutes ago, people were saying, isn't it great that Jordan Peterson makes like 2.5-hour videos and people, they get 1 million views? What changed? Nothing. What changed is there's a bunch of people on, in different media who see that TikTok is making a lot of money. And so Facebook has shorts and reels, and YouTube has shorts, and they all want their short thing. But the point is, it's still all, I mean, if you want propaganda, look there. It's short. You can't put much content into it. You can't question it. And what would be the point of such communication? So no, I'm not interested in that. But that's where propaganda comes in, is when you get people following techniques. And it's, so the truth can be put into a propaganda mode and become the hoax, which is what I feel has happened in many spheres of Christianity.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that, because in kind of my search for a home, at a church, I obviously kind of fell into the Orthodoxy camp, and I very, very quickly realized that there was a lot of, and to my disappointment, but it felt like there was a lot of propaganda in that. And I don't know about Europe and stuff like that, but like in in America, especially amongst like the young men, is like they're all kind of using this repetitive language over and over that they don't really know. Like, I don't know what they're saying. They don't know what they're saying. You know, one of the churches that I went to that I really liked, eventually the parish priest did like an interview, like an hour-long thing with Tucker Carlson about like, you know, the trans whatever. And I was just like, you know, I mean, and I kind of agree with him or whatever, but just to see that, like, Tucker Carlson really, like, what is going on? I don't know. I got really disappointed with it all because it was like, it very much felt like a LARP, I guess, in a lot of ways. And so,
well,
I don't know. I've had
it's also the fact that
now.
Tucker Carlson often speaks the truth, but the whole presentation of Fox is propaganda. That is to say, it's just the way that it's presented. I mean, even the graphics, the backgrounds and everything. See, when I look at something, I see the whole picture. And I'm not just hearing words. I'm also looking at, where are you when you're doing this? You know, what kind of studio are you in when you're recording your videos? What, you know, and because I think a lot about things like texture, I think about, you know, there was a reason why old television had very blank textures in the back. And the reason for that was because they couldn't actually capture certain kinds of textures very well without creating a kind of video feedback. You know, you've seen those lines that, you know, like sometimes they're too close in older videos and they just kind of, they make this jittery motion in certain fabrics. So they were trying to avoid that. But now our cameras are so good that it doesn't matter anymore. But those techniques developed back then have mutated into the present. So you get, like, for instance, the lines scrolled across the bottoms of things. There's no point for that. You know, that is just a technique. September 11th really made people go crazy for that sort of like stuff rolling across the bottom and whatnot. But even still, having these names and stuff, well, you know, and so Tucker Carlson, I often agree with him, but I can't stand the presentation. And because Fox's whole thing is essentially being right-wing propaganda. Now, as far as the Orthodox Church goes, what I notice is, and there's a big difference between the Orthodox Church people I meet in Georgia versus the ones I encounter online. The ones I encounter online remind me a lot of myself in the early Jesus people days, because they are filled with enthusiasm for what they believe, and they want to, it's like every answer to the question is these separate things. That is to say, that is, they've learned this new way of looking at things, but they don't actually inhabit it yet. And I often get the feeling they're trying to, they didn't stop being postmodern people the day they stepped through the door of an Orthodox church. You know, and it just doesn't happen that way. You end up being, you know, it's like you're taking the shell of who you are and hoping it breaks and that you become this new person. And I think that can happen, but at the same time, it doesn't often happen quite that dramatically. And so people learn new words that explain new things. And this is why, like I've tried to say this many times, I don't think anyone's learned anything until they can put it in their own words. In other words, they can translate it out of Peterson speak or Orthodox speak or you know, Labrie speak or evangelical speak or left-wing speak or right-wing speak, and give me an idea of why they actually engage with this. You know, and so what I often get is, I often get this as well-meaning comments on my videos, these phrases that immediately come from, obviously, say, the Orthodox tradition. And like I say, I immediately know they mean well, but at the same time, I say, like, they're young, you know, they haven't really put their faith into the tumbler of the world to have it knocked to pieces. Whereas the Georgians, interestingly enough, they can say the same things, but then again, they live in this world. The world outside of my doorstep is Orthodox, whether a person is Orthodox or not. And so, for instance, they take it much more loosely in a sense, which may or may not be good. But for instance, I have friends here who are very devout Orthodox. And at the same time, you would look at what they're doing and go like, huh? They don't act like the kind of ways that I often call the new Orthodox people in America, the evangelical Orthodox, because and I mean that because they're still taking with them. They're often refugees from the evangelical world, and they're still taking with them. And they'll say things to me like, "So, Byrne, you're in an Orthodox country. Are you going to become Orthodox?" To which my thought is, and this is genuinely true, I'm thinking about it. I'll go to Orthodox churches now and then, but at the same point, I'm not in that mindset. You have to remember, I've been a Christian for over 50 years. I became one at the age of 15. I've seen a lot of Christianity go under the bridge, and I've been to different kinds of churches. And one thing I've realized is they all have issues, and Orthodox people tend to think, well, the Orthodox Church doesn't. We're always the same. And I just want to pin the word nationalism on there and go like, what do you think about that? And what do you mean by that? And do you think that the church must, for instance, and then you have what happened between Russia and Ukraine. Oops. Yeah. And then the church in Russia simply goes along with what has happened. And the church in Ukraine says, uh-oh. And the problem is a lot of people in the Orthodox world today who are recent converts are doing so through a modified version of Russian Orthodoxy. And they want to obviously maintain their solidarity with Orthodoxy. But come to Georgia and say that, and they'll look at you like the Russian church, the Russian Orthodox Church is completely lost it's lost itself. And so it's not as simple as it is made out to be, and again, one of the problems with Orthodoxy is each one there are different Orthodox churches, and the Georgian church is very different from the Greek church, is very different from the Ukrainian church, is very different from the Russian church, etc. Mm-hmm. And the Orthodox in America don't really see that because, again, they're living through an evangelical mindset. So they're just glad to have found a tradition which is solid and stable, which it is. But they don't understand, for instance, Solzhenitsyn, very Orthodox, wrote to one of the patriarchs in the Russian church saying, like, what are you doing? To the whole church, and they don't see that huge tension between the state and the church, which has a lot of tension connected to it, which is I would say, the heart of the Orthodox dilemma, whereas the heart of the Catholic dilemma is on a very different axis, has more to do with the Pope, but it also has more to do with statuary, more to do with the way the Catholic Church will kind of accommodate different cultures. So when it shows up in Mexico, suddenly there are saints that never existed anywhere else that seem to be hand-switched signs from older deities that were worshipped in a general area. Whereas the Protestants' problem is that we essentially believe that the individual is so strong that we can choose for ourselves exactly how to interpret the scripture. And the further we go in time, the more crazy we get with this concept. And I've been to some Pentecostal churches where they basically say, the scripture is less important than until God comes to you and teaches you, which basically puts you at the center, your revelation at the center. And so you get all of these tensions. Every tradition has their tensions. And at the same time, I appreciate every tradition. And some I think are stronger. By the way, I am on this version of Zoom. I haven't felt like spending the money yet. That in 10 minutes, I'm going to have to send you another link. So, and I'll let you know right before we do that. So anyway,
Cool.
Tell me more about your observations. And
well, it's interesting, like as I was kind of, I guess a while ago, kind of exploring, and just kind of seeing the rise of like Orthodoxy in America, I thought it was really fascinating because at the same time, like the heretic I guess I am, I was like reading a lot of Camille Paglia, and there was this thing that she talked about in decadent art that was super fascinating, of like this return to the East as like the end of Western art. And she points to a couple examples across time. One, she uses history books where it's like what our Western mythos does start in Mesopotamia, our history, even like, I know it's very distant, but that is kind of where our history books start. And then she points to figures from like Lord Byron going and dying in the Greek War, or maybe it was the Turkish, I can't remember. And she points to figures like Elvis, how he kind of ends in like Byzantine clothing and kind of those really elaborate costumes that he would wear. And I just found that so fascinating, how like on this large scale there was like this, like most people were kind of like, the Orthodoxy online is like this memeified, like, oh, we do it for the beauty and the art. It's like the true, the good, and the beautiful, and they just pick the beautiful and they scrap the good and the true. It's like, yeah, because kind of how you were talking about with the state and the church. It's like a lot of them will be like, oh, state and the church, they can have a happy marriage together. Putin's awesome. I know some people go that far. I know a lot of people don't. I'm not trying to like generalize or slander, but I just noticed that pattern and I found that super fascinating. Like, I just wonder if that plays out more and more in the future. Like if we're just seeing the beginning of something, or if it fizzles out.
We are at many different ends. And I think actually the move towards Orthodoxy is a good thing on the whole. But again, it does have connected with it this, there are certain people who will simply, you can tell it is possible to LARP this stuff. It is possible to simply put the clothing on. And so suddenly everything you do is the icons and this, whereas you don't find that here. Like I said, it's old here. I mean, we're talking the second country to convert to Christianity is this one in the 4th century. So it's not like it was a new idea to anybody here.
Yeah.
And surprisingly though, Georgia's Christian traditions are quite strong, although there have been periods where they were in danger. For instance, they were in danger in the 19th century of being taken over by the Russian Orthodox Church, who actually went as far as to get rid of the Georgian Orthodox chants, which are some of the most beautiful chants you will ever hear. But I think that, and when I talk, I have some friends here who are very Orthodox, and when I talk to them about what's going on in the world, their sense of perception of it is absolutely really clear. I mean, it's a very intelligent. But one of the things is they're not coming, what's a Protestant? They don't even know. They're not coming with any sense of conversion. They're not coming with any sense of if a person here decides to become a Christian, 9 times out of 10 or 99 times out of 100, there's only one kind of Christianity, and that's Orthodoxy, is to start going back to the Orthodox Church, because, there are people who are very nominal in their faith as well, because it's a societal thing, But I think that at the same time, you will meet younger Georgians who have been, on this thing, the little,
Yeah.
and they have been exposed to the larger world, but they don't really get it yet, so they want to be individual, and they don't get the fact that our individuality is part of what's killing us. It's that each society has its own basic sins that it's working through. And I think that the move towards orthodoxy has been the move towards trying to find a way of being together as part of a body. And I think that is also a crucial thing that's left out. My feeling, though, is that I tend to, there was a guy from Yugoslavia, I think, I can't remember if it was Bosnia or Croatia or Serbia, Miroslav Volf, who eventually came to the West, but he was there during the time of the Bosnian, the whole Yugoslavian wars during the 1990s. But he came out of I think he was coming out of a Pentecostal tradition, which was very strange for Yugoslavia. But but at the same time, he pointed out that there were Orthodox there, particularly in the Serbian army, who would give, like in Catholic churches, you see this. And that is, Jesus is doing this. Whereas, let's see if I can do this correctly. In Orthodox churches, you would see this. My fingers aren't as nimble as they were when I was a child. And that symbolized the Trinity. And so there would be soldiers on the tanks to go commit atrocities who would be giving the three-finger salute, saying they were more Christian than those other people who were Catholics, maybe the Croatians, because they were doing the two-fingered version. And he talked about the difference between what he called thin belief and fat belief. And thin belief is essentially when it becomes a coding, and you can really see this in Catholic countries, and you can see it in Orthodox countries, but you can also see it in countries where Christianity was part of the actual structure. So whether Germany or England, where you would have a state church, you'd get this thin belief. The thin belief is, for instance, many Europeans, when they fill out a form, what religion are you, will just check the box Christian and do nothing. That is, say they don't hardly ever go to church. They don't even necessarily believe in anything. But it's as opposed to being Islamic, as opposed to being simply atheist, non-religious. They'll just check the box. Yeah. But then they will often be the people, and you see this, for instance, in that Serbian example, of the people who get most upset that, the infidels are winning. And he talks about that being very thin belief, that what it is that you're simply identifying with Christianity as a culture. But here's what the best Protestants understand, it's not a culture. Christianity could disappear in a generation because it's not a culture, it's a choice. It's a choice of faith. So if you get this sense of if you get this sense of being connected, like I'm defending my culture. Whenever I hear the Americans talking about that, from whatever, I hear Protestants as well as Catholics, as well as Orthodox, they're all guilty of this. I immediately back up and go like, okay, let's stop there. I'm going to send you another link. Actually,
we did it.
Okay, we got another 40 minutes. So, but anyway, I think the problem is it's really easy. For instance, I've always found it really suspicious when people, for instance, on the right in America, equate gun rights with Christianity. Now, I'm not saying gun rights aren't important, but there is no way they connect to Christianity. That is simply an American political issue and to equate the two, that somehow all good Christians must believe in a certain view of gun rights, is absolutely heretical, because it's, again, you're equating the state on politics with the faith, with the death of Christ on the cross, with the resurrection, which can't possibly be justified. And I think that, and at the same time, if I'm in America, I go like, yeah, gun rights, fine. But I've met so many Christians who have, in their very wise questioning of the mainstream liberal left narrative, they have added certain kinds of issues to their faith. Again, it's this what Miroslav Volf called thin faith, but it's the thin faith which is the most dangerous. Because if someone has thick faith, then they realize the depth of what they believe. They realize, for instance, that no, Jesus wouldn't have been a gunslinging cowboy. There is a lot more going on than there, and I think anyone who takes their faith seriously is not going to make these additions to it. And they will learn how to keep these things in separate compartments. And if things change within a society, for instance, so my feeling is, okay, if I lived in if I lived in England suddenly, where there are a lot more controls on guns, does that mean that the Christians there aren't Christians because they go along with the society? No. And to think that way is to think in a very provincial, narrow way. There are Christians in many different societies. And here, I can tell that the more nominal Christians are the ones here much more likely to get upset and go full on ballistic over political issues. Whereas many of the people, and this idea of this thin, brittle shell on your Christianity, which I feel has to be a propaganda shell. That is to say, you're living within this bubble. It is the deformation of faith to live in a bubble where you connect politics with religion. Having said that, I think my faith informs my decisions in the political realm. But then again, my definition of the political realm is probably a little different than others,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I don't know. I just think it's crazy. I don't know, the kind of the rise of like orthodoxy and the political left and the right. It's like, so one of the things that I wanted to talk about on the fairy tale side relates to all of that very much. Because I said in one of my messages that I think the fairy tale it's not very popular. I didn't know it existed until like, I don't know, maybe like a month or something ago when a couple of my friends were talking, is the fairy tale. It's a Grimm's, well, I don't really know where it originated, but it comes from the Grimm's fairy tales, and it's Tom Thumb. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about how it's like, that's kind of the story of the Zoomers, you could say the millennials too. How so? Of like this. So what? And this may be, not a perfect allegory, but if you look at, there's a lot of versions of Tom Thumb, but basically he is this, wife or a peasant wife and a peasant husband. They want to have a kid. They kind of ask, just even a little man would make us happy enough. And so they have Tom Thumb, like a little man the size of a thumb, and everything in the world basically just tries to swallow him up. He tries to get like literally swallowed a lot of the time. Like he gets swallowed by a cow. He has to cut himself out of the cow. He gets kind of swallowed by this troop of bandits, and he has to trick he's constantly also like tricking his way out of stuff. And it's super fascinating to think about that, because once I like implied that pattern to things, and like I saw it everywhere. It's like all this stuff is just trying to swallow you. And so I wonder about the fairy tale quite a bit, and I've thought about it a lot, because part of me wonders, like, Tom Thumb never becomes a full man. He never grows to full size. And that's stuck out to me. Like, maybe there's this, is his unwillingness to be swallowed by anything hindering him? And then, of course, you know, one of my friends brought up kind of the kind of Christian subtext of Tom Thumb being related to like a very trickster kind of form of like the Christ story of like he's constantly getting swallowed and comes out, swallowed, comes out. But it's like I don't know, it's like the little man version of that story almost. Like it's too much of a trickster.
Well,
it doesn't have enough of the redemptive
here's
resurrection.
An interesting corollary. Because what's at the beginning of that story is the husband and wife who can't have a child.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is there's a Czech version of this kind of story, Little Otik, and it's about a husband and wife can't have a child. So they get desperate and they find this piece of wood and they ask it to be their child. It becomes their child and starts to grow and be alive. And they keep feeding it. And after a while, it keeps swallowing and it grows and grows into this massive, strange thing and starts swallowing everything.
Huh.
So
wow,
it's the opposite story. There's actually a movie of this by Jan Schwankmeyer called Little Otik. And it is a crazy, it's a mixture of live actors and stop motion puppets. And the Otik character is a stop motion puppet.
Ooh,
but what's strange about it is that in a sense, you have some of the same elements. In many ways, you have one of the things that I think resonates with us are the families that can't have children, the couples, you know, and in our case, it's often because they waited too long.
Yeah.
You know? But then you have in the Tom Thumb story, you have in the best case, plucky little guy who survives everything.
Yeah.
But in the other case, you have the little deal they made with the devil, so to speak, who then begins to swallow the world. And I think that when you look at this, the central elements seem to be, for instance, swallowing. And what makes that interesting? I'm just kind of thinking out loud about these things. I haven't really put it together this way. But what makes it, why is that important? And at the same time, I look around and I find what is one of the main kinds of people you find, particularly in North America, Canada, America. You find it also in the UK, and to a lesser degree in various Western European countries. And then the further east you go into Eastern Europe, you find this person less and less. And we use the word geek to describe this person, someone who's a movie geek or a Marvel superhero geek, or, but what people don't realize is where that word comes from. And it comes from carnivals, where there was a performer. See, they used to have sideshows, and in these sideshows, if you had a person with 3 legs, you had a show, and people would display this person as a freak. If you had a person, what's interesting is many of the people they used to put on display now, we see commonly, like the super fat person. There were so few of them that they would go on display. Or the person totally tattooed. There were so few people with tattoos that tattooed people would go on display, which is very fascinating. But every now and then, someone would come into the carnival or the circus and to the sideshow and say, "I want to be a part of it." And they say, "What can you do?" And they go, "Not much." but the person might be an alcoholic or something, and they just go like, well, we'll keep you in what you need. If you do, we have a job for you as called the geek. And the geek's basic job was to pretend to be a freak. And they would do stuff like swallow the heads of snakes, bite the heads off chickens. It was all about swallowing weird stuff. And somehow, over time, now in the 1970s when I grew up, that's what it still meant. We were kind of rediscovering the word at that point. But then somehow, by the 1980s, it started to get applied to people who were also called nerds. Although some people have said nerd and geek are two different kinds of people, they're obviously related. The nerd being, say, more intellectual or something like that. But
yeah, I
whatever.
can see the distinction.
But the point of the geek is the geek swallows everything. Everything that Marvel puts out, everything that the DCU has for you, everything that Star Wars has for you, everything that Minecraft has for you, everything that the church has for you in your mega church. It's that you just simply swallow and swallow and swallow, and it's the low tech. So in a sense, but what we need are more Tom Thumbs who will punch their way out. Now, but do we want to be trickster figures? There could be a use for a trickster figure, but the point is, you don't put your faith in the trickster figure. You don't want, for instance, your priest or minister to be a trickster figure. You want them to be solid, But there could be, within the context of a congregation or a group of people, a trickster figure, a comedian who will poke at the things that need to be poked at and punch their way out of the things that need to be punched, which is why comedians are very important today, because there's so many new constrictions on what you can say that you need a good comedian who will come along and just say the things that you're not supposed to say. Interestingly enough, if you go back into, say, the 1990s or so, many Christians were saying to themselves, oh, I can't believe that this comedian is using this bad language, and I can't believe that they're saying these terrible things about sex and such. Whereas now, the Christians are more likely to be on the side of the comedian rather than the side of the new Puritans, who are, health, safety, offense Puritans. Don't cause offense. So it's very strange how that works. But nevertheless, the trickster figure is important, but he's not someone you should follow.
Yeah. Well, I guess some of my other thoughts on fairy tales is immediately one thing that came up in my mind you said just like how people we can't make fairy tales for the modern age. Do you know what creepypastas are?
Oh yeah.
Have you heard of them? So I was thinking about them like, there was a really cool article on Jonathan Peugeot's blog, The Symbolic World, like a while back. Right. And it wasn't written by him. I can't remember who it was, but it was about like ghosts in the machine and all these kind of stories about this kind of undead world that we have on the internet. And I was thinking like these creepypastas are not, except for like two of them. I know like Jeff the Killer and Slenderman have been copyrighted, yay. But most of them are in the public domain. And they're just kind of told over and over orally in a lot of ways, or, maybe on a blog. And it's like our attempt to tell modern fairy tales, because it'll kind of like identify a certain archetype online. They'll have like the gaming ones, or the more like creature ones, all that sort of stuff.
Well, there was the whole thing of the Red Room. Do you remember that?
Yes. Yeah.
And that was kind of a weird internet meme creepypasta kind of thing where supposedly there was this room. If you found it on the internet, it was a digital room that, all these horrible things would happen or were happening there or something like that. Evidently that one.
They made a pretty good movie.
Yeah. I think that started in Japan, if I remember correctly. But But yeah, well, the truth is that every new thing we do creates new symbols, or repurposing old symbols into new things. So, we call these spaces rooms. Right now, supposedly we're in a room together, which of course we don't. And why is my room greenish? It's greenish not because the room's greenish. It's greenish because my camera's bad. And it's going to get worse as the sun comes up more. We started in the dark here, and I can see the light. If we get to full light, my face will be totally blown out by let's see. Oh, no, I'm not ready for that. So, but no, that's just the process. For instance, one of the things that really bugs me about books of symbolism, or even the best symbol dictionaries, is they never include modern things. So they'll talk about the symbolism of the wheel, or the symbolism of the color blue, or the symbolism of snakes. But they never talk about the symbolism of the baseball bat, or the symbolism of the train, or the symbolism of the car. Or what about the car turned upside down on the side of the road as you're passing it? Which to me is this, for an American, that is the symbol of death. Because we rarely run into death in normal life, in normal American life. It's a rare thing to see someone dead. But as you're passing the burnt out husk of a car on the side of the road, everyone slows down, because that is the symbol for us of death. We all know that could be us, where, and interestingly enough, modern hospitals have taken on the imagery of death, because we have so pushed death away from us. Heaven forbid someone die in their house. They've got to be getting the last saline drip. They've got to be getting the last, be connected to machines that are going to ping. And, that's how we die in America. Whereas that's not how they die in Georgia. I had someone whose mother died next door to me, a guy named Georgi. Half the men in Georgia are named Georgi, so I'm not outing him by telling him that. But no, I met his mother. She was getting sick. He sat there with her as she died. But we had a great deal in common, because in Alaska, I sat with my mother as she died. She didn't want to die in a hospital. I didn't want her to die in a hospital. So we had a good, it was difficult in the extreme, but that's death, And I think that what's happened is so there's all the symbolism. I don't think we at all understand the symbolism of, for instance, the smartphone yet. It's there. Yeah. All I have to do is do this, and you know what I'm doing. I'm scanning something out there by just this weird hand gesture, this size of a device. It's strange how it's created new images. For instance, suddenly all the images got turned like this because people couldn't figure out how to turn their camera this way, and it was more natural to take a portrait that way. So suddenly, out of that, TikTok is born, because TikTok is all the vertical image. These things create new images. The images, of course, there was vertical, there was horizontal, there was the screen, all of this prior to the smartphone. But then the smartphone changes everything, just as one could say that the train or the car are based on the wagon, or the coach from before then, drawn by horses. And you can find these kinds of things in the old symbol books. But to me, there are things that trains do, like it's like if you've ever been in, well, you're in Texas, right?
No, I'm in Missouri.
Missouri, similar. I'm sure
I do have family in Texas. So
well, I'm sure though you've been stopped at a crossroads waiting for a very, very long train to pass.
Oh, yes.
And there are people who don't understand that experience. But if you're in Texas or in the Midwest or in the Plains, and you see this, and that is a symbolic event. There's a great song by It was written by Butch Hancock. Joe Ely does the best version of it, called Boxcars. And he says, if you've ever heard the rumble of a fast freight train beating by the side of the road, he says, I don't have to tell you why I'm going down to hear the boxcars roll. And that is a completely symbolic event for a person from that area. This rumble of the trains going by. Or as I've seen it, as I've driven in the West, way off in the distance, you'll see a train in the last part of the day along the edge. And you just see it moving, this very long train going by. But that's a totally symbolic event. It gets to us a certain way. And I think that the creepypasta and such is the kind of it's like folklore, symbolic folklore being invented on the internet. At the same time, interestingly enough, they tried to make a Slender Man movie and it didn't really work that well. And I think it's because what I've noticed is it's the word creepy in the front of it. That is to say, creepypasta is a story. So it's a story or interaction with a set of stories that are related to certain concepts and such. But the people, for instance, okay, so you're afraid of creepy things, but no one understands what they're saying by doing that. Why is the Slender Man in the forest creepy? Well, they don't understand what's changed. And this is part of what I'm going to get to in my Cute and the Creepy series, is that, we now will look at old dolls, puppets, Halloween masks made before, say, 1960, scarecrows, let's see, clowns. And we will look at that stuff and say, ooh, that's creepy. And what we don't realize is that the people in the first part of the 20th century who made that stuff that we call creepy didn't consider it creepy. Yeah. Something has changed in our perspective to create this creepy phenomenon. So, and I've heard people relate it to the uncanny valley idea, but I think that's totally mistaken, which I'm going to get to when I get to my discussion on it. But nevertheless, we can't help but create new symbols, new symbolism. And the new symbolism is based on the classic stuff, but it's much more elaborated upon. And some of it has more or less resonance than others, But I think we can. C.S. Lewis talked about making fairy tales. He thought George MacDonald made the deepest fairy tales, and I would agree. And it's right now, to make a fairy tale in our world, I think the problem with the creepypasta stuff is that it's not that imaginative. It doesn't really go into what, it just has a concept or two. See, and the door opens slowly behind you. Creepy. But anyway, those are some of my thoughts about new variants on folk stories, symbolism, and all of that.
Well, I definitely did notice that there's something missing, I guess.
See?
My creepy roommate just came in. No, I'm kidding.
No, what's funny is I didn't see him. I just saw little bits of the door. And for some reason, we've been trained through paranormal activity movies and stuff to see every little movement as creepy, which is strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're in an almost totally white room. So all I saw out of that whole interaction was the top of the door open.
Isn't that perfect?
Yeah, it is.
Hey, it looks a little better from some angles, but yeah, this is the worst one where it's all you have is this white wall and this white wall.
Well, my friend Job from the Netherlands calls these Netflix boxes.
Yeah.
That's what people are living in now, just white walls that you don't really want to look at. So you turn the lights down at night and watch Netflix.
Uh-huh.
And if you have, a quote unquote partner, then you can Netflix and chill.
Perfect. I yeah, it's the creepypasta being different from the fairy tale is like it's kind of obvious in a lot of, like, it's reaching for it, but it's like it's obvious in its shortcomings where you can't really like inhabit it. There's no like archetypal perspective at all. It also doesn't, and I'm not saying this like I'm applying modern storytelling standards, but it's like there is no, like, even if in an old fairy tale where the monster eats the girl or whatever, and that's the end, it's like, I don't know, there's not like a lesson about it, I guess. It's really just kind of just to scare the crap out of you.
Let me ask you a question. How do you think children were raised 200 years ago?
They were probably treated a little more like adults in little bodies.
Yeah.
So
but they had things
better
like dolls.
in some ways, worse in some.
What do you think their dolls look like?
Would that be like the super realistic kind of wooden, or what, like the rag dolls?
Exactly. Because most people, they were about 200 years ago, they were just starting to make the first porcelain dolls. But obviously, the only people to really own those would be rich. So what most children had would be something like a rag doll, a kind of a wooden doll, but it wouldn't be, you're not going to carve for your child some elaborate piece of wood and then have them break it, which is what they're going to do. They're going to test the limits of that thing. So you're going to make them, some sort of simple thing for them to play with, probably made out of fabric and such. Now, if I go back to my childhood, I'm 67, so let's say, 65 years ago. Television was quite primitive, but we had these little toy soldiers and such that we would make on the floor. And what I would do was I'd get these and I would make little stories up with them. But, I didn't know too much about World War II, but I would make up stories. We actually had little Germans and little Japanese and little Americans and little Brits. And, but we also had cowboys and Indians, little cowboys and Indians, these little plastic figures. And we had dinosaurs. And, well, naturally, they all fit together. So after a while, you had the Germans being killed by the Tyrannosaurus Rex, or the Indians attacking the Americans, or whatever. It was just like, you had this, we also had little cavemen that went with the dinosaurs. I don't know why, but, the same dinosaur set had woolly mammoths, cavemen's, Tyrannosaurus, Ankylosaurus, and all this stuff. It was all mixed together because, it didn't matter to us. But these were more specific than toys in the past. And when I was young, they had just created the Barbie, and of course I didn't play with Barbie. And there were quite a few other childhood things. I'm not trying to describe everything, but what's interesting though is that what we hadn't gotten to yet, the Barbie is still a very abstract figure if you think about it, although they kept making more and more Barbies that became less and less abstract as time went along. But now, if you look at the way people have grown up, say in the last 25, 30 years, they have very specific figures. They have the Hulk, and they have, the Little Mermaid, and they're very specifically related to the franchise entertainment that they are a part of. And what I think is that, what can you do with these? Well, of course, you can do all sorts of things still with them. But they are much more specifically a certain thing that you have to work within the scheme of that franchise entertainment to make sense of. So the child with their little rag doll has to put all of their imagination on top of the rag doll. And meanwhile, they're hearing their parents telling folk tales and fairy tales and things. They're hearing but what it is it gives more room for the imagination, because the thing itself does not occupy all that space. But by the time you get to, say, the Star Wars universe, and you have all these toys that you can make out of the Star Wars universe, you have to, although some people will use their head canon, you have to basically play within that which is set up for you. In a way, I didn't feel that responsibility of playing with all my soldiers that way. And of course, a child can still rebel, but they've got such specific things that a certain amount of and video games are even more like this. A certain amount of what would have been your imagination is now taken up, is done for you. So you have less imagination to use. That is to say, that's not to say every child is without imagination. It's just that they're not practiced. Yeah. And the point of childhood is to practice using that imagination on things to explore what will be the adult world eventually. And I remember the day I was playing, we also used to have little guns and stuff when we would run around and play as a child. And I remember the day I got shot in a game by, plastic rifle. And my friends all said to me, "You're dead. You have to stop moving." I said, "I'm not dead." And he goes, "You're dead." And I just started crying, because it was like, it's not fair that I have to die. And then I went to my mom and says, "Do I have to die?" And she goes, "You have to die." Now, she wasn't a Christian, so she didn't give me any hope about death. It was just like I had to die. I remember this moment obviously very well. I can tell you exactly where I was, because it was the game prepared me for the fact that one day I am going to die. And it did so in a very the imagination of playing with my friends outside, by the way. I had to follow the rules of the game, which happened to, in this case, follow the rules of life. You're going to die. Huh. And so I think that the people creating creepypastas are largely a product of the, shall we call it, just post-Star Wars generation. They don't have the same practice at using the imagination. And I would say my imagination growing up was a bit less than the imagination of someone who just had a Raggedy Ann doll, or just played with a stick and pretended it was a gun, which is what you would have found in the past, or you still would find when I was young in certain very impoverished places. And that's one of the things that puppeteers often tell me, is that the puppet provides a stage, in a sense, a place for your imagination, for your fantasy. And all the puppeteers agree that the big budget franchise entertainment that we have, the video games, it's not that they're bad, it's just that they do so much for you that you can no longer act within the space in your own manner and provide your own images. The images are so specific that, I love Lord of the Rings, the films, and the book and the films. But one of the things is when you read the book, you create your own character. And I had not actually read the book before I saw the movie, and I knew the movies were coming out. So I said, I've got to read the book first so that I don't I have my own characters before I see the movie and immediately weld those images onto the book.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And it's kind of that stereotypical like video game nerd who's also like super analytical, math and science. And it's just funny because he's living in like these crazy fantasy worlds, but he's like extremely logical.
We call that creative. We call that fantastic. But in
Yeah.
fact, it strips away. It to me, it makes total sense that the nerd is also very analytical, because I can tell you myself, having created quite a few bizarre stories, it doesn't take an analytical mind to be creative. It takes a mind that is practiced. I mean, I realized later, oh, all that stuff I was doing with my army men and my dinosaurs and stuff, that is how I learned to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do you learn to tell a story if you're writing fan fiction based on a franchise entertainment? I mean, you can learn to write a story, but your story is going to be much more impoverished. I mean, I remember I went to Los Angeles to try to get someone interested in my documentary about puppetry. And I started telling them about my life and ideas. And these producers I met in Los Angeles were like, wow, you're like the real thing. You've had actual experiences. Whereas everyone else in Los Angeles is like, has been watching Star Wars and Marvel, and you know, they know the history of horror films, so they know the history of Westerns or whatever, and they're building stuff based on that.
Yeah.
But they're not building stuff based on, I mean, when I think, this is one of the reasons why I don't like postmodern theory, that where they say everything is a text on a text on a text. I'm going like, no. You know, my bears are not based on text. They're based on the bears that I've actually seen. They're based on nature in that regard. But my humans are also based on humans I've actually met. It's not a text upon a text upon a text, unless you want to argue that a bear is a text, which I would say the bear would probably disagree. And I'll put you in a forest and let you know that there are huge bears there who can smell things 5 miles off. And I'll let you go talk with him about whether he's a text or not. Well, we're about to make the switch again. So go ahead and shut yourself off. I'm going to shut this down, and then I'll send you one more link, and then we'll call it a day then.
Okay, sounds good. We're back, part 3.
Yes, part 3. This will be the last for sure. So, it's imagination, and so in the creepypasta, I feel a bit of the paucity of imagination. I feel a bit of, it's just not as strong as it would be, you know, if in a sense, and so in a sense, the question is then, how should parents raise children in order to foster actual imagination? But that's a much bigger subject, which I'm not going to pursue at this moment.
I get that. I don't know. One thing I always, I was always drawn to for, I don't know, a lot of video games got me into that sort of world, but I just think about fairy tales and folk tales and conspiracy theories and how that kind of culture has gotten so big. I had always kind of been in that world because like certain video games kind of got me into
Can you explain to me the connection between fairy tales and conspiracy culture?
Well, I feel like there is a connection, and I guess that's kind of what my question is, like, if you see any connection, because...
Well, tell me why you think there's a connection. I'm really surprised.
They posit like this enchanted world in a way, where it's like if you take one, and you've seen how it goes now, where they take 10 of them, and they all apply these archetypes to the entire world. Like like for example, like flat earth people will be like, oh, big NASA, it's all lying to you and stuff like that. They make this big great enemy that's out to get them and the whole world, and it's like, it's interesting. It's like they supply like an entire enchanted world, but it's something interesting now that we've been talking, how you said it's like these franchise movies, they supply you with something, so they like limit your imagination, and it's very much like conspiracy theories kind of do the same thing, where it doesn't really it kind of gives you the illusion that you're in this kind of like big enchanted story, but it actually puts up certain walls in a way that you can't break out of. Like, it's funny, like the conspiracy theorists will question everything until you start questioning the conspiracy, and then they start, oh, you're questioning this narrative now. And I find it interesting though, like there's something about them and like kind of this like folky type of knowledge. Like there is some sort of like, there's a lot of correct pattern recognition within a lot of these stories. And I just kind of wonder, like there's clearly a thirst for whatever they're offering that no movie, no written story would supply, because it's like it really is like an oral tradition almost. And so it's really big in a lot of ways and can get really big really fast. And it has like a lot of power, way more power than well, in time, maybe some of these stories can have way more power than any Star Wars movie will, because they kind of intermingle like real life and mythology, and it's super fascinating to me, like that whole world.
Yeah, I would look at them as I often tend to look at them as religions for people who no longer believe.
Yeah.
But they function as religions, though. That is to say, they have articles of faith. One of the articles of faith is that you have to doubt everything you see, which is a strange article of faith. But the next one is, of course, doubt everything you see except for the narrative we're about to tell you, which will explain everything.
Yeah.
So I've followed several of these rabbit holes pretty far down, like the Masonic theory about how the Masons are behind everything, or the Catholic theory about how the Catholics or the Jews are behind everything. And once you start looking at one of these views, and if you just start adopting their set of glasses and get their parallax view of the world, then you are suddenly in it's like it all seems true.
Yeah.
It's like you suddenly start saying to yourself, aha, that's why this is happening. But it purposely, what's weird is it believes that everything we see, it's very Gnostic. It believes that everything we see is an illusion being presented by people who have far more control over everything we see. It's like they tend to see everything that's going on in the world as a stage in which all these are puppets being manipulated for our edification, or to con us into believing whatever it is they think we're supposed to believe. And so, did we land on the moon? Did Kubrick make the shots? As soon as you start thinking that way, you immediately can't help it. I have one book, something like The Ultimate Conspiracy Theory or something. And I read the whole book, and this guy is linking everything together. September 11th, he starts with September 11th, goes back to, various financial scandals, goes to Watergate, goes to the Kennedy assassination, goes to the communism, and goes to the Nazis, and goes back, and after a while he's at the Illuminati, and then he's going back further, and he's kind of going through the Da Vinci Code, and he's going back and back, and then he's in the Bible, and then finally, well, it ends up all being the lizard people and the aliens. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, this is brilliant. It's a way of hooking everything together to try, but it's like only people who don't believe anything, who can't trust their eyes at all, except when they find, what I love is they find the secret, which happens to be just sitting right out, and all these other people know the exact same secret. Or there was this comedian Eric Bogosian back in the early 90s came out with this piece, and he was doing different characters, and one of them was this guy was going like, yeah, so the whole place is being run by, and he's talking about whatever group he thought it was being run by, but he's doing this as a performance, and he says, but it's a secret, but I know about it. And I'm sitting there going like, how do you dummies know about this? Yeah, because really, the people who come up with this stuff, I mean, whenever you listen to them actually talking, you're going like, no, I'm not going to believe a word this guy says. This guy has no credibility at all. But enough people get together, flat earthers. It's like, really, guys, even Columbus didn't believe in a flat earth. It's just kind of like, what are you talking about? So I think that what I've learned is that, for instance, one of the more recent ones is that this is all a simulation. That someone from an advanced society made a kind of matrix for us all to live in. And I'm sitting there going like, do you realize you have to have seen the Matrix to come up with this theory first? Because no one was talking this way prior to the Matrix. Maybe a couple of weird science fiction people, and they would say, yeah, but Baudrillard talks about the simulacra, and he didn't mean we were all living in the Matrix. He was not talking about this in a Gnostic sort of way. But it's the point is that many of these ideas have gone viral, have become contagious exactly during the time when everyone started watching and being glued to television. So that, of course, you don't understand the world. You're watching it through a screen. It's like, how can you come up with any ideas? It's like if a person tells me, yeah, I watched this video on YouTube and that video over here, then I watched this and watched that. I go like, I would be much more impressed if you told me you read books. But even then, it's like I would be a lot more impressed if you just told me you were outside in the woods. If you were just talking with farmers. If you had any sort of sense of what the reality of the world is at all. Because to me, we have to find some sense of reality. And this thing, much as I'm enjoying talking to you, by the way, much as I enjoy the conversation, I am not deceived into thinking I know you as a result of this. And a person shouldn't be deceived into thinking they understand me as a result of watching whatever I present on screen. That this, I hope, communicates something of worth, but I know that the difference between this and you sitting in my room and us talking is a different order of experience entirely. And one involves realities that cannot be put through the machine.
There's a lot there. Yeah, it's just interesting. Like, I don't know, our attempts at trying to re-enchant are failing miserably.
Well, what we don't understand is if you actually walk out into the woods, as I have in Alaska, in the real woods, that is to say, woods where you're sitting there saying a bear could come out here as I'm picking mushrooms, or go out in the winter, saying, listening to the wind howling above you in the trees and such. And no, you're not going to find pixies and fairies, but you're going to feel something out there that is much more different than anything you could find online. There's no experience online, not watching nature videos, not, just watching a webcam of someplace in the woods or something. Nothing is going to teach you what it feels like to go out into the actual woods in a place like Alaska, where, if I walk 100 yards, 100 meters off the road, I'm already in nature, even though it's not far, the road is not far from me. And I remember once, I love the movies of Tarkovsky, and I decided to do, and in Tarkovsky movies, his camera pans slowly over things, and he's exploring reality through the camera, and he knows he is. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to do a Tarkovsky walk. And I'm walking down this one trail, and I'm just kind of like being very quiet. Now, just to let you know, in Alaska, walking down a trail and being very quiet is not a sign of intelligence.
I can see that.
Because you need to occasionally say, hello, bear, because the bears don't really want to meet you. But I'm walking down this trail, and all of a sudden, a black bear jumps up and runs off in front of me. And I said, okay, that was an interesting experiment, and I turned and walked away saying, I think that's it for the day. Because, you realize that I have to rethink this, because I'm going out there and it isn't what I think, although that was a wonderful experience, but it isn't what I think, it's what's there and how to best appreciate it. And sometimes the best way to appreciate it, like when I used to go mushroom hunting, I would go in the, like around September, and I'd be out there looking for mushroom. I can identify about 10, 11 of them. But I'm very quiet all of a sudden, but my senses are super alert, and I'm listening for just that sound of crunching leaves, because that sound could mean something's coming. So I'm hyper aware of certain things. I call it bear awareness. If you know there's bears in the area, you will not walk out into the woods, just kind of like casually, not thinking about anything. I was just telling a Georgian the other day, and this really surprised this younger girl. I said, yeah, in Alaska, if you go out into the woods, listening to music, you are an absolute idiot.
Yeah, totally.
Because you have to keep your, and I said, that's what makes mushroom hunting here so incredible, because I'm not just hunting mushrooms, but as I'm hunting mushrooms, it's like I'm fully using my senses, because for one thing, I'm using my eyesight to identify the difference between leaves, which could be orange falling, or chanterelle mushrooms. And after a while, you start to see the pattern of mushrooms versus the more chaotic pattern of leaves. So you're using your visual senses very sharply, but you're also smelling the earth. You're smelling the environment. You're smelling the mushrooms. You're smelling the earth that you're looking for them, and you're also touching things. And you're using your hands to dig into the earth, although I would cut the mushroom at the base to allow the mycelium to grow back rather than dig it out. And you're using your sight, obviously. You're using, like I said, your hearing becomes super important. And as I'm there, I'm also using my experience. I didn't start off being able to identify 10 mushrooms. I started off saying, like, I think that's chicken of the woods. And then double checking, and then going, that's chicken of the woods, I can eat that. But then what kind of tree is it actually growing on? Do I want it on a hemlock, or do I want it on a spruce? And suddenly you're looking at trees. You're saying, the sharp spines are the spruce, the really mellow spines are the hemlock. And you're identifying, you're looking at bark, you're looking at texture, you're listening to the wind above you. You're listening to water rolling on the side of you. You're identifying places where a mushroom might grow and where it might not grow. You're identifying also, if a bear comes, what do I do? Your senses are just absolutely strong. For instance, you could also attract a moose, which is also extremely dangerous. In fact, more people die of moose every year in Alaska than die of bears. And so you're just, but that is the experience of nature. And that's an experience we don't have that much anymore.
Yeah.
And so, but, and I often say, Herman Melville, a great writer, went out and went around the world in whaling ships. And he came back and wrote Moby Dick. George Lucas watched serial adventures in movie theaters when he was young and did Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark. We look at those and base our fantasy on those. And all I know is this: if you actually interact with real people, with nature, in real cities, we're in situations like, living in New York City, I had to keep my wits razor sharp about me because it could be a very dangerous environment. Here in Georgia, I have to constantly keep thinking about language and how to interact with people whose alphabet is psychedelic and whose words sound like a radio station channel being switched back and forth, because it's nothing like what I'm used to, which is one of the reasons I moved here. I love the culture here and such, but I also like the fact that as I get older, it keeps my brain sharp, because it's so easy in America to just kind of like get into your recliner, kind of like, we're going on a voyage, give me the beer, and you're kind of sitting there in the control panel. Okay, oh man, let's go use my smart television and watch some more YouTube, which you can do here,
very disembodied.
Yeah, but it also means that our sense of imagination, our sense of intelligence is dulled. And I think it can be revived, much as if you want to learn to taste food, if you feel it's all gotten dulled, don't eat it for a while. And suddenly you will be, oh, wow, this really tastes good. Don't stay so hydrated in the summer, and then you'll taste your water. Americans have gotten, George Carlin points out, when did we get so thirsty? Why does everyone carry their water around with them now? And because when I was young, you didn't do that. He says, like, get a drink before you leave. But that's how we roll now. Is we're always Americans. I tell people Americans don't drink water anymore. They stay hydrated. But get dehydrated and try drinking, some sort of fruit juice or something, and you'd be like, whoa, this is so good. So in a way, the way to get the imagination back is to kind of starve yourself from the instant forms for a while.
Yeah.
It's not to never watch a Star Wars movie, but take a fast. Take a fast from the big stuff. Take a fast from the fancy stuff. It's just like if you want to taste food again, don't eat so much. Get hungry. Work out. Do whatever. Take a long walk.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So, hey, I think this is a pretty interesting conversation. Do you mind if I use it?
Yeah, I don't mind. I think it's going very well.
Okay.
Yeah, totally.
So I'll put it up in. I'm
glad it's been that interesting.
Probably a couple of weeks. November. I've been getting more lately because I've been wanting to. Well, I want to finish off the Cute and Creepy series, but there's other stuff that I really want to do, writing in particular. So,
I have a question about that cute and creepy stuff. Just a kind of curiosity. So, do you think creepy is negative too? Like, do you think people back in the 1500s had creepy stuff?
Not the way we understand it. I think the way we understand it now, like I said, looking at things like old toys, old dolls, old puppets, clowns, scarecrows, all this sort of stuff, I think is creepy to us now in a way it wasn't even 50 years ago. And I've been pondering before I make my videos exactly why. And I think I found the reason. And part of it has to do with this. We are surrounded by, in a sense, and I use the word loosely, perfect entertainment. So digital imagery, perfect model making for toys, perfect Halloween masks are all so common to us that we don't understand the homemade. So, and now you have generations of people who have grown up. You know, anyone who's grown up since, say, the year 1980 has their whole life has essentially been surrounded by these absolutely fantastically made images. And the problem with these images is they take up too much space inside of our heads. And they also tell us that good imagery is detailed imagery. Whereas my feeling is good imagery may be simple, or it may be
meaningful,
or it may be filled with texture. What these people are often also reacting to is texture. And but you'll have to wait for we'll just put that. And maybe, well, by the time I do this, I will certainly done my introduction to the series, but I'll still be doing the cute part. Okay, David. Well, have a good night.
Have a good rest of your day. And
which part of Missouri? North or south? Middle?
It's kind of northwest, so I'm in.
Okay.
It's like 30 minutes north of Kansas City.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that the northwest part is one of the better parts there.
It's definitely kind of the hidden gem of that area, because a lot of people, they see the Ozarks and they're like, oh, it's so beautiful, I want to move there. Like I knew a lot of people that moved to the Ozarks area from California, and I'm like, oh,
you don't know what you're
awakening. Well, it's like, oh, but the lake is so pretty, and it's like the people that
but the meth labs are so pretty.
one of the first times, because I was from Arkansas and Texas, and so one of the first times we moved to Missouri, or one of the first times around the time when we first moved to Missouri, we got invited to a lake trip down to the Ozarks, and we're driving there, and we take a pit stop kind of middle of the nowhere. What was that place called? I had been there quite a few times. I don't know. It's outside of the Ozarks. And this guy has this like GMC pickup, the real old one. And he has a deer head, an entire deer head, a nice buck. Like it's got to be like a 12-point buck. And it is sawed off at the neck and duct taped around the antlers to the front of his truck. And he's like pulling in to fill up his gas. I love that.
Yeah, but at the same time, that represents what has happened to the country as well. Though the people in the country are not these romanticized. Oh yeah, country people with their barbecue. And no, it's it's like
so scary.
And their meth labs, and their alcoholism, and who knows what else is going on, and their churches, but it's complicated, obviously. So
sure.
Okay.
Well, it's been good to talk to you.
I will have a good day. You have a good evening, and we will talk again.
Cool.
Take care.
Okay, so there you are. I thought that was a very fascinating conversation. And I look forward to talking to David again sometime in the future. I am currently in the middle of, it's weird, my life here, it's kind of like the best of times, the worst of times. I've had some very, very good experiences here, and I will continue to have very, very good experiences. But I had one scare that caused me to wonder, how long can I stay in Georgia? But I also had one person assure me they knew the president of the country. I think Do you want me to make an update about my current situation here? If I get 10 people who say, yes, make an update about how things are going on those sort of practical levels, I'll give you one in the near future. Meanwhile, as the Georgians say, droebit, which literally means temporarily, which means like temporarily. We'll see each other again in the not too distant future.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.